Hi guys, it's Courtney, and today we are going to work on these bird boxes. First things first, if you need to, please go wash your hands, because if you have any oil or food particles on your hands, it could get in on the pottery and mess up your artwork, and we don't want that. So please, if you need to, pause and go clean your hands and come back to me. But if you're ready to go, we're gonna look at a couple of things we have here today. So in your kit, you are gonna find glazes. We have 2 shades of yellow, 2 shades of pink, a purple, and a little tiny bit of black, because we only need black for the eyes. But let's take a look at this sample. I'm just gonna move this out of the way. So here's our little bird box. He's really cute. His lid comes off. He has a feather on top. Inside we put some cool stripes. We have wings, 2 eyes, a beak, and a tail. So I gave you pinks and yellows in 2 shades. So if you would like to paint your bird yellow, you could paint your bird yellow, and the details could be in the pink, or you could paint your bird pink and then do some details in the yellow. So just if I'm gonna do the pink, if you wanna do yellow, just do the opposite of what I do color-wise. A couple of things about glaze. It's a little bit different than paint. You're going to want to put a couple of coats on instead of 1 coat. Like if you were painting acrylic, we would just put 1 coat, but with glaze we have to put more, because the brush strokes will show up if you have maybe 1 coat, but if you have more than 1 coat, the brush strokes will kind of start to disappear. Although on this particular project, the brush strokes aren't really a problem. It kind of gives it the texture. So don't worry about it if you feel like that's how it's starting to look. That's totally fine. So glaze needs to be fired in the kiln to show its big bright colors. So if you think these colors are a little pale right now, when they come back to you after you give them to us to fire, they will be much brighter and bolder, and they're gonna look really cool. So how about we get right into it? From home, you are going to need a glass of water, a jar of water, and some paper towels, and everything else you should have in your kit. So let's get started. I'm gonna do mine pink. So how we're gonna start this is we're gonna look at the lid first. So I'm gonna set this aside. And we're gonna be using 2 colors of pink, a light one and a dark one. When you're doing shades of a color, it's always good to start with the light color first, and then layer the darker color on top of it as we blend. So to start, we're gonna take our brush. You don't have to dip it in the water first. Glaze is a little bit different than paint. The wetter your brush is for glaze, the runnier the colors will be. So it's good to kind of keep your brush as dry as possible. If you have to rinse your brush off, just use your paper towel to dry it off, because this way there won't be excess water in there, making your colors look a little thinner. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna dip our paintbrush in the light pink, and we're just gonna start working our way out from the center. So a good way to do this is you can kind of lay your paintbrush right at the bottom of the feather and move outwards, and kind of use strokes that are short. Okay, so we're just painting from the center out. And if you want to pick it up and hold it in your hand, because sometimes as you're going down, it's going to stop before the curve of the bird. So you can just kind of push your brush down to get all the way down to the edge here. Now don't forget, glaze is a little different than paint. So we're gonna paint a couple of coats. So we're just gonna repeat these steps. So I'm gonna fill all the space in, making sure I'm getting the rounded edges, just like that. I'm being careful near my feather, so I'm just gonna put my brush there really gently and pull back towards the edge, making sure that I round my hand to get the curve there. A little bit more, just placing it there gently. because we don't want to get too much pink on the feather. Sometimes if you have to get your brush right in the corner, you can wiggle it a little bit and pull it down. So that's going to be kind of the base of the top. So that's one coat. Okay, so now that we have our first coat down, we're going to start introducing some of the darker pink, and we're going to blend it together. So we have our light pink underneath, and I'm just going to dip a little bit of the brush into the darker pink, and I'm going to start streaking it in. So some of the light pink will come through, but some of the dark pink will come through too. So I have some light pink and a little bit of the dark pink, and I'm going right like that. Being very careful by that feather and streaking down. And it's okay if some of these brush strokes are showing. So if you want to have some big chunky ones, that's cool. If you want some light ones, and then I'm going to go back to some light colors. So I'll have a little bit of the light coming through on the top too, going all the way around. If you get a little bit of the glaze on your hand, that's fine. It totally washes off. This is also safe for your clothes. So get some back to the light. And we'll switch back and forth between light and the darker pink, just to have some dimension in there. Spinning it around. So at this point I've gone around twice already, so that should be a good amount of the glaze, because usually when we do a pottery piece we do 2 or 3 coats, but we don't need to go super heavy on this because we want to have it look like feathers, so some texture. So you can go back a couple more times with the light color and the dark color just to get some different streaks in there. Okay, so I'm going to set that down for a second. And since I have the pink on my brush still, I'm going to continue with this color. So we're going to do the body the same way. So we're going to avoid the eyes, the beak, and the feathers on the wing area. So what actually I'm going to do is I'm going to put that down, and I'm going to grab a smaller brush, because a good way to avoid painting into spots that you don't want to be in is to outline them. So I'm going to take some lighter pink on my brush, and I'm going to go around my eyes very carefully. The eyes we're going to leave white until the end, and then we're going to add black for a pupil. So I'm just outlining it, and this will kind of protect the eye from getting glaze on it, because when you're painting the bigger space, you won't have to worry about getting so close to the eye. So just go really carefully around the beak. Like that. There we go. And I'm going to do this eye. And then I'm going to start doing the same thing around my wing. Just be very careful. And it actually doesn't really matter so much on the wing, because the wing is going to be a darker purple. So if you get some pink on the wing, that's okay, because the darker purple will cover that up. Because the dark colors will cover the light colors. It's much harder if it was the other way around. If we had a darker color, like a purple body, it would be harder to cover up a purple with a pink. So these wings have some little feathers that are kind of stacked here, so I'm just being really careful going around each one. But once you get into the groove of it, it'll be easy. There we go. I'm going to come around to the other side. okay? And I'm gonna do the same thing around the base of the tail, just so I don't end up getting the wrong color up there. There's a little area up here too that you could work around. Okay, so that's the pink. I'm gonna rinse this brush off because I don't wanna use that again right now. And I don't want the glaze to dry too much on it. So I'm gonna take my bigger brush, and now I have all these spaces, but because I put my outline, it'll keep me from painting over the wing. You're not going to paint the bottom piece right here, so just kind of paint around. Okay, so as you can see, as I was painting, I kind of went over some of my outline a little bit because glaze will get darker depending on the layers. But now that I was comfortable with how I was painting, I was kind of okay getting closer up. And if you end up needing a little bit of space to stay away from the eyeball, that initial outline is there, and that should cover you. So we're gonna do the same thing that we did on the top. Is we're gonna do our second coat, but as we do our second coat, oh, I missed a spot. As we do our second coat, we're going to introduce the darker pink. Let me just get that in there. And it's a good idea, if your brush is too big, you could turn your brush to the side and make it a little bit thinner if you could fit into those spots, or you can use your other size paintbrush. Now, I think I'm gonna switch to a little bit of a smaller brush because I have the base down and I really wanna show a little bit more of the feather texture on here. So by using a smaller brush, I'll have some thinner strokes, and the dark pink could come up a little bit more. So we're gonna start just kind of, and I want you to think about it, feathers are gonna go in a certain direction, right? They're not gonna go sideways and up and down. They're all gonna kind of go in one direction in certain sections. So the belly here, I'm gonna keep my strokes up and down. If I start doing my strokes side to side, that's gonna look a little less like feathers. So I'm gonna focus on making my strokes up or down, which is a fancy word for that is vertical. And I'm gonna go back and forth between the light pink and the dark pink just to kind of get some different colors in there and mix the textures up. You could do short strokes because feathers are usually short. So kind of just let your arm do a lot of the work. Kind of feel how the feathers would move. Again, being very careful around my eyes. And if you get glaze on your eye, that's okay, because you could just take a little piece of a wet paper towel and wipe it off. That's the good thing about glaze. So we're gonna have some light pink and some dark pink feathers here. So now I'm taking a look at it and I see some dark pink, I see some light pink. I'm liking it. I'm gonna go around this eye really slowly again. Oop, I got a little tiny bit, but that's okay. Again, you guys could wipe that off with a paper towel. And I'm just blending these two colors together. We're gonna rinse our brush off. We're gonna dry it off on our paper towel. And we are gonna go to the inside of the body. So now for the inside of the body, I'm going to do the light yellow first, and then I'm gonna add darker yellow lines like we have over here. Here it's blue and black. The black is not glaze fired in here, so it looks a little pale. We were just testing something out. So your yellows will look different than here, and the darker yellow will stand out more with those stripes. So I'm gonna take my yellow and I'm gonna do 3 coats in the inside. And I can already see my brush was a little too wet, so the yellow's a little thin. So I need to remember that I need to dry my brush a little bit better. So we're gonna do 3 coats in here. Okay, so I did 3 coats on the inside. Now I noticed the rim of my bird is still white, and that's fine. I'm gonna put some pink on that while I let the yellow dry. So I'm gonna take my smaller brush and I'm gonna do, I'm gonna do a little bit of both pinks, but I'm gonna go slow. So I'm gonna kind of work my way around, introducing both dark and light pink. Okay, I'm gonna go around it 2 more times. Okay, so next we're gonna move on to the feathers. So take your medium brush, make sure it's dry enough, and I'm gonna take my purple. We're gonna do the wings, the tail feather, the tail feathers, and the top feather. So I'm gonna let that dry for a minute. So I'm gonna switch to this feather. I'm gonna take my purple and I'm gonna do 3 coats. Just be careful not to get in your pink, and switch to your small brush if you need to. We're gonna do 3 coats of this as well. Don't forget the under feather. Switching to my small brush to get the tiny little area in between the feather and the top of the bird. Okay, I think I'm just going to keep my small brush for the second two coats, second and third coat. Now glaze dries very fast, but it's always helpful to do the third coat after the second coat is dry, because if your glaze is still wet, it might just move around instead of adding another coat. So I'm looking at my purple and it's a little shiny still, so that means it's still wet. So a good way to dry your things quicker is to either use a hair dryer, which I don't think is completely necessary for this small area, but maybe as we go to the feathers, you might want to try it. But I'm just going to blow on it, let it dry for a second, and then start my third coat. Glaze dries very, very quickly, much quicker than paint. Okay, so that feather is done. And I'm gonna come here to my tail feather. Now, I'm gonna rinse my brush off, set it aside. I'm probably gonna come back to it, but for now, I'm gonna switch back to my medium brush, making sure it's dry enough. And I'm going to brush outwards. So I'm gonna start by putting my brush right in the corner here and come up. And you want to get in, make sure those little cracks in there, the feather texture cracks are filled in. And you can do that by kind of loading enough glaze on your brush and just kind of going the same direction as it. Not the opposite, I apologize. Go the same direction. So on a little bit of an angle to make sure those are nice and filled in. Flip it over. And then we're going to do our third coat. But before we do the medium brush, I'm going to go back with my small brush and just make sure I have all those little white spots in there covered. On the back too, like under this feather over here is a little tricky spot. There we go. So now our third coat. Once the first coat is done and your cracks are filled in, you don't have to really worry about going in the same direction as the feather because you're already covered and there's enough glaze on here that you know that the cracks are definitely filled in. Also make sure to check the very tips of your feather to make sure there's no white peeking out. Okay, so next we are going to do our wings. So I'm going to take my medium brush, and the first thing I'm going to do is, because there's a lot of little markings here, I'm going to kind of just make sure I get into those little creaks and cracks. Cracks is probably not the right word, like little dips. Just make sure that there's enough glaze in there that it won't be white. And that'll kind of be my first coat. So I'm filling in all these little areas. And then I'll just finish my first coat. Now I was being careful as I got close to my pink, and I knew I had too big of a brush for that small space. So I'm gonna go back to my other brush, my smaller brush, kind of fill in those white spaces here. Okay, I'm gonna let that dry for a second before I come back for a third coat. I'm gonna come over here, and I think I'm deciding as I go that I'm fine with this brush size in this space. So I'm gonna stick with this. I'm just gonna make sure again, my little dips and divots are filled in here. And then I'm gonna do my 3 coats. Now I want to show you something interesting. So when I went back to my third coat, I put on a nice layer, but the glaze was so thick I kind of lost the texture marks inside my bird. So I'm just gonna scrape any extra glaze off of my brush, and I'm gonna kind of just go back and pick up some of that extra glaze. When I run my brush against it, it's gonna come up onto my brush, and I'm just gonna scrape it off the side so I could really see that texture in there. There we are. Now those little things are back. I can see them better. Go back to the other side, do the third coat over there. Okay, so I'm gonna rinse my brushes, both of them. gonna tap some extra water off because my paper towel is now almost soaking wet. Dry it off. And we are going to do the beak and some lines. So for the beak, I'm gonna take a number 9. And I'm using my small brush. And I'm just gonna go and paint him 3 times. I'm also going to do some feather lines, like you can see here. I have some blue lines going on top of the yellow, so I'm going to do that, but I'm going to do yellow on top of purple. Now, purple is darker than the yellow, so this isn't going to come out super bold and bright, but we're going to give it a shot. Right up. The center of the feather. Now I'm going to let that dry for a minute. So while that's drying, I'm going to go back to my purple for a second. Switching my cups. And as you can see on here, around the bird, we have green feather marks up the back and the sides on the little belly. So we're gonna do that with the purple because our wings are purple. But notice there's none up here. It's kind of in a half moon shape. So I'm gonna start up here and I'm gonna make a curve and leave this space up here without the purple color. You wanna make sure your wings are dry, they're pretty good. And we're just gonna make little marks, just down. That's it. They don't need to be on top of each other. Try to avoid any obvious pattern. Turn. I'm just checking to make sure I didn't miss any obvious spaces. Like this space right here feels a little empty, so I'm gonna go in there. And we don't have to do many coats on these because the purple is darker and we don't want it, we kind of want it to blend a little bit. So I think if you see any that look a little too light, you can cover up, but you should be good. Or if you just enjoyed that so much that you want to do another coat on it, that's fine. But that'll still show up. Okay, so we're gonna go back to our dark yellow and we're gonna start doing the lines inside of the bird, but we're also gonna do the feather lines on the lid right here. So it's just one thin line up. Three times. We're gonna come back up here and do another coat on top of the yellow on the tail feather. Okay, so now we're gonna make these lines on the inside, and it's really nothing special. You're just going to take your brush and paint up from the center. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take our hand, we're gonna hold it just like this. Get a good amount of glaze on there and just start from the center and come on up. And if the lines break at some point and they're not connected anymore, that's totally fine. It's still a cool look. And just rotate in your hand the bird as you go. These don't have to be perfect. They don't have to be straight. They don't have to be connected. They're kind of just some abstract marks to just add a little something something on the inside of this guy. Kind of looks like a little sun. I like it. Okie dokie. So some of them look a little light, so I'm going to go back with a second coat. Okay, I like it. So let's do a check. We have everything we need done on this one. We have tail feather, wings, extra feather, highlight. The top is done. So all that's left, it looks like, is the eye. So I'm gonna show you guys a pro tip. You're gonna take the back of your paintbrush. It's a nice rounded point, not pointy, it's a little rounded end. And we are going to take our black and we're gonna dip the end of our paintbrush in our black. We're gonna hover our paintbrush right over the eye and we're just gonna gently press down. Move it around a little bit, and there you go. You have an eyeball, a pupil. We're gonna do the same thing on the other side. Trying to make sure the eyes are about the same size, and I think they are. I like it. And you can use the paper towel to wipe off the back of your paintbrush. And let's do a last minute inspection. I think that's it. Okay, and there we have it. That is your bird box, guys. It's super fun. So what you're gonna need to do is when you return your project to us, just make sure your name is on the bag with your other supplies that you're returning, and we will get this back to you after it spends a little bit of time in the kiln over 1,000 degrees hot. Thank you very much. I hope you guys have a nice day, and I will see you soon.